evening and a warm welcome to Personal Finance. I'm Gugulethu Cele. The fuel levy hike and tax increases announced in South Africa's budget speech may have left some consumers confused. Henry van Deventer, Head of Wealth Development at Old Mutual, joins me now for a look at how the budget affects your pocket. Not just yours, but mine as well. Let's start off with one of the most significant changes, Henry, which has to be the personal income tax increases.
Absolutely. If you look at personal income tax, I think there are two things that will impact on us over the next year. The first thing, each year with the budget they talk about massive tax relief, but actually all that they do is they adjust the brackets in line with inflation. So the tax relief that we so often hear about doesn't really, after inflation, happen for most of us. So the first thing is, if you're a lower income earner below 181,900 Rand a month, that I hope that's the exact number, then after inflation you're going to be roughly in the same position. But if you earn more than that, for those earning more than 182,000 Rand per year, we're actually paying 1% extra tax. So after tax, we will be left with a little bit less this year. Not that much. If you're earning 1.5 million Rand, you'll be paying about an extra 1,100 Rand or so per month. If you're earning 800,000 Rand, it's an extra 257 Rand. So, some tax there, but not nearly as big as the impact that we'll see when it comes to the fuel levy on inflation. And one or two of the other areas that's set to impact on us quite heavily over the next year.
Let's talk about the tax changes though first. Does this mean that maybe as South African consumers we need to review our budget as it may stand, or our spending habits, because many people are actually over-indebted and overextended when it comes to their financial commitments?
Gugu, that's a very good point you make. And I think when it comes to reviewing our position over the next year, you're absolutely right. And that is something that we need to do. Because not only if you're earning sort of more than 182,000 Rand odd per year, will you be slightly worse off? There's a double whammy also in the form of inflation and the impact of the fuel levy and the RAF levy. So what we saw is an increase in those two levies combined of about 80 cents. So the RAF levy has gone up by 50% almost, the fuel levy by 14%, way ahead of inflation. And because petrol will be more expensive, it's more expensive to get the goods to the shops, and it's more expensive to drive to the office. And on the back end of that alone, inflation will go up by about 0.7%. So if inflation goes up based on the levies, and the oil price should go up, heaven forbid, from $60 to $80, for example, over the next year, it's very easy for us to now suddenly start running close to 6% inflation, as opposed to the 4.5% where we are now.
Exactly.
So here's the problem. Here's the whammy. The tax brackets were adjusted by about 4.2%, which, by the way, is 0.2% less than inflation.
Too many numbers there, Henry.
Well, here's the simple principle. Over the next year, our salaries will increase by more than the tax brackets increased, which means that after tax and inflation, we're likely to be worse off. So if we're not very careful and prudent about how we're going to set that extra money aside, 2015-16 could end up being a tougher year for us.
That's not what we want to hear, and especially if there are proposals for other taxes to increase going forward in the next budget speeches.
Absolutely. I think, if you look at the other taxes, one of the other considerations that we need to also look at is we also saw an increase in transfer duty on property. So the maximum transfer duty has gone up from 8 to 11%, which means that if you're going to buy a home over 2.7 million Rand or so, it's going to be slightly more expensive. Not much. If you buy a 6 million Rand home, you're going to pay about 100,000 Rand extra. So it's much more in tax, but if you look at the overall price, not that much more. But all these small little bits start adding up. And talking about future tax, that's a very valid point you make. So here's the concern. Government needs to continue earning enough money to support the economy. If the economy is not going to grow at the higher rates that they're expecting, and most of us don't expect that higher growth to come through, the only way that they can make more money to pay for debt and to pay their own salaries would be by continuing to increase taxes. So what we may see in the next year is an increase in the VAT rate, which would impact on all of us, and even perhaps something like the introduction of a wealth tax. Which could make a lot of us in those big homes that are now more expensive slightly less comfortable.
Exactly. Speaking about homes, often when one does sell one of their primary residences or anything else of significant value, is capital gains tax, and I understand that there might be slight changes with regard to that too.
Well, how capital gains tax is calculated is, part of the formula is that it looks at your highest tax rate, and you pay, about a third of that in capital gains tax. So now the maximum tax rate has gone up from 40% to 41%, which means essentially most of us will be paying capital gain tax at an extra 1/3%. Doesn't sound like much, but I mean, if you've got a home that's worth 3 or 4 or 5 million rand, and you've got an investment portfolio that's worth a couple of million rand, these things start adding up.
Oh, Henry, now that you've given us the bad outlook, maybe let's touch on some positives, because we do know that tax-free savings accounts have recently been launched, actually in the beginning of March this year. Absolutely,
and this was specifically mentioned in the budget. With effect from this past Sunday, the 1st of March. What was introduced by government, by Treasury, was a vehicle called the tax-free savings accounts, which, well, with effect from now, should be available to all South Africans through major banks, major financial institutions. And how a tax-free savings account basically works is you don't pay any tax on any of the interest you earn, dividend you earn, capital gains tax you have. So it's hugely tax efficient. You can save 30,000 Rand per year in these vehicles.
That's the maximum, right?
A maximum of 30,000 Rand per year. It doesn't have to be a lump sum, can be monthly, etc. Up to a total lifetime contribution of 500,000 Rand. Now, lots of people may say, well, it's 30,000 Rand a year. Is that really enough to make a difference to most South Africans? Well, if you're up to 500,000 Rand and you're 40 years old today, by the time that you're 60 or 65, taking into account compound growth, you could be sitting on 2 or 3 million Rand. That has grown tax-free. So in short, whether you are on the high income end of the South African economy, on the low income end, the reality is, here's a vehicle that you can have access to all of the time, that you don't pay any tax on, and that the costs are controlled on. They cut out performance fees on asset management, stuff like that. It sounds like small changes, but they do add up. So for most of us now, aside from our retirement funds, going forward, it's become a no-brainer. Fill up your tax-free savings account first. You should be much better off over time.
Just on that, I understand that there are also strict rules with regard to the withdrawal. If you deposit 30,000 Rand, you can't go back and take 10 and think that you can reinvest 10 afterwards. If you withdraw, you withdraw, and you're in it for the long term, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. You can make a lifetime contribution of 500,000 Rand. So if, for example, you made your 500,000 Rand contribution, you take 100,000 Rand out. You can't put it back in to go back up to 500,000 Rand. Once it's in, it's in. Once it's out, you can't put it back in. So just something to remember. And I think it makes it a challenge, because as South Africans, we're impulsive. We're only human. But if we see this as an access facility, we'll end up missing most of the benefits that the vehicle can give us over time.
Exactly.
Put it in, keep it in.
Put it in, keep it in, and live off of the tax-free outcomes of that investment vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Retirement reforms, are there any particular implications on that? Because we do know that in South Africa we have a dire crisis where people resign from certain jobs, cash in their retirement, and then go find another job and start from scratch again.
Yeah. Well, the Minister and Treasury have spoken about retirement reform for a number of years now, and we started seeing small little steps. But specifically in the budget this year, they mentioned through the course of 2015, they're looking at implementing some of the major building blocks or stepping stones when it comes to retirement reform. And I think there are a couple of considerations behind that. Probably chief amongst which is the one you just mentioned. If you look at South Africans, we've got this really bad habit when we change jobs of taking the money out. And one of the challenges for government is, can you force people to save, because we don't tend to save ourselves. And what they want to do in retirement reform, one of the measures is they want to put forced preservation in place. In other words, if you change jobs, you can't cash in your pension fund, you've got to put it in a retirement fund, which is long-term one of the very best things that we can do as South Africans. The concern is, though, there's a lot of opposition from the unions, etc., that don't necessarily want this to happen. So it would be very interesting, looking at how government deals with this over the next year or two, to see whether they sway, to the pressure of the unions, or whether they take perhaps a decision that's in the better long-term interest of South Africa's citizens.
Let's quickly deal with two scenarios here. If you're someone who's basically on the verge of retiring in the next couple of months, should you act on this news? Or if you're someone who's planning on leaving their job to cash in on that money, is it best to just leave it there? Basically, how do they need to react to the news from the finance minister?
Look, as a rule, it's always better to leave it there. But if we look at the basic guidelines around retirement reform and what we have seen, the idea is that it probably won't be retrospective. So all future savings into retirement funds, we won't be able to cash in, but at the moment it looks like we'll still be able to cash in that which we've saved up to this point. However, don't let that be a reason to go and cash in your retirement funds. But there will be some leniency so that those people that maybe had some plans around what they've already got won't be jeopardized as a result.
Henry, notes to self that one needs to consider following the Finance Minister's speech?
Okay, well, a couple of things to look at. Firstly, tax-free savings accounts being in place. If you can save in the same stuff without paying tax, it's a no-brainer. So all of us need to know where that's going to slot into our financial planning going forward. Secondly, the tax impact on us as individuals is not as bad as it could be in following years if the economic growth that government expects doesn't come through. So, try and save the most you can, before tax rates go up. And try and minimize your taxable income. As retirement reform comes through, you should be able to save more and deduct that from your taxable income as it becomes available through the course of the next year. Try and do that and make the most of it. And you should be on a pretty good wicket.
We certainly hope so. Henry, thank you so much for your time today and giving us that analysis as to how we need to prepare ourselves following the Finance Minister's speech. But that's all we have time for this evening for Personal Finance. Thank you once more to Henry van Deventer, Head of Wealth Development at Old Mutual. Remember that we'd love to hear from you, so get tweeting and send us your insights. You can tweet any of your comments to @CNBC Africa using the hashtag Finance410. You can even tweet Henry at @VinnyViddyHenry or to myself @Kukumfupi on Twitter. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.